The man in bed 4 didn't look at me when I walked in. He was on his phone. I introduced myself, told him I'd be his nurse for the night, and asked how he was feeling. Without looking up, he raised one finger, the universal sign for wait. So I waited. I stood there in my scrubs, holding his chart, while a man I had never met made me stand in silence like I was his assistant waiting for permission to exist. That was my first interaction with Richard Calloway. And it was, by a wide margin, the most polite he would ever be to me. My name is Elaine. I've been a registered nurse for 11 years. I work in the acute care unit of a mid-size hospital in the Northeast. I've seen things that would make most people cry. I've held hands while people took their last breath. I've been screamed at by patients in pain. I've been vomited on, bled on, and cursed at more times than I can count. None of that bothers me. That's the job. I chose this job because I believe that taking care of people when they're at their most vulnerable is one of the most important things a human being can do. But Richard Calloway tested every ounce of that belief. Richard was 57 years old. He owned a chain of luxury car dealerships across 3 states. He had been admitted for chest pains that turned out to be a minor cardiac event, nothing life-threatening. He needed monitoring, medication, and a few days of rest. A straightforward case. The kind of patient who should have been easy. He was anything but easy. From the moment he was admitted, Richard treated the hospital like it was one of his dealerships, and every nurse, doctor, and orderly was an employee who wasn't performing up to his standards. He complained about the room temperature. He complained about the food. He complained that his IV was uncomfortable. He pressed the call button an average of 14 times per shift. I know because I counted. On his second night, Richard called me into his room at 3 in the morning. I was in the middle of administering medication to another patient, a 70-year-old woman recovering from surgery who actually needed my help. But Richard's call light was flashing, so I finished what I was doing, walked to his room, and asked what he needed. He wanted a different pillow, not an extra pillow, a different one. He said the one he had was too flat. He said he was paying too much money to sleep on a pillow that felt like a pancake. I told him I would see what I could find. I went to the supply closet, found a slightly firmer pillow, and brought it back. He felt it, made a face, and said it was worse than the first one. He told me to try again. I tried again. I brought a third pillow. He threw it on the floor. I picked it up. I didn't say a word. I placed it on the chair, told him I would check with the day shift to see if there were other options, and I left the room. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from the effort it took to remain professional. The next morning, I mentioned the pillow situation to my charge nurse, a woman named Deborah who had been in nursing for over 30 years. She sighed and told me that Richard had already complained about 3 other nurses during his stay. She said the man was a nightmare, but we just had to get through it. She said his doctors wanted to keep him for 2 more days, and then he'd be someone else's problem. I wish it had been that simple. On Richard's 3rd day, something happened that changed my life. I was making my rounds. I walked into his room to check his vitals and update his chart. Richard was on the phone again. I waited for him to finish. When he hung up, I approached his bed and explained that I needed to check his blood pressure and adjust his IV drip. Richard looked at me and said, "Do you even know what you're doing?" I told him I had been a nurse for over a decade and that I was very confident in my ability to perform these routine procedures. I said it calmly, professionally, the way I had been trained. He said that wasn't what he asked. He said he had been watching me for 3 days and I seemed, in his words, scattered and disorganized. He said he had been in hospitals before, better hospitals than this one, and the nurses there actually knew what they were doing. He said he didn't feel safe with me as his nurse. I took a breath. I told him I was sorry he felt that way and that I would do my best to make him comfortable. I reached for his arm to take his blood pressure. And he pulled away. He said, "I want a different nurse, someone competent." I stood there for a moment. I had been insulted by patients before. It comes with the job. You develop a thick skin. You learn not to take it personally. But something about the way Richard said that word, competent, like I was beneath him, like my 11 years of experience meant nothing compared to his opinion of himself, that word landed differently. I told him I would speak with my charge nurse and left the room. What happened next was the part I didn't see coming. Richard didn't just request a different nurse. He filed a formal complaint, but not just about the nurse reassignment. He claimed that I had been rough with him during a previous blood pressure check. He claimed that I had been dismissive of his concerns about his medication. He claimed that I had made a comment about his weight that was, in his words, unprofessional and demeaning. None of it was true, not a single word. I had never been rough with him. I had never dismissed his concerns, and I had certainly never commented on his weight. I am a professional. I have 11 years of spotless performance reviews. I have never had a single complaint filed against me. Not one. But Richard Calloway was not just any patient. Richard Calloway was on the hospital's board of major donors. He had contributed over $200,000 to the hospital's new cardiac wing over the past 5 years. His name was on a plaque in the lobby. And when a man whose name is on a plaque in the lobby files a complaint against a nurse, that complaint does not get treated like a routine HR matter. I was called into my supervisor's office the next morning. Her name was Patricia Torres. I had always respected Patricia. She was fair. She was experienced. And when I sat down across from her desk, I expected her to tell me that she knew Richard was difficult, that the complaint was clearly exaggerated, and that we would handle it together. Instead, Patricia told me that the hospital was taking the complaint seriously. That given the severity of the allegations, I was being placed on administrative suspension pending an internal investigation. Unpaid, I felt the room tilt. I asked her if she was serious. She said she was. I asked her if she had read the complaint. She said she had. I asked her if she believed it. She paused, a long pause, and then she said it wasn't about what she believed. It was about protocol. Protocol. The word tasted like metal in my mouth. I walked out of that hospital carrying my personal belongings in a cardboard box. My stethoscope. A framed photo of my kids that I kept at the nurse's station. A mug that said "World's Best Mom" that my daughter had given me. A small succulent plant that a patient had given me 2 years earlier because I had held her hand during a panic attack. I put the box in my car, sat in the driver's seat, and stared at the building where I had spent 11 years of my life. I didn't cry. I was too angry to cry. The drive home was the longest 20 minutes of my life. I kept replaying the meeting with Patricia in my head, the way she wouldn't look me in the eye, the way she said protocol like it was a shield she was hiding behind. I knew Patricia didn't believe Richard's complaint. I could see it in her face. But she made the calculation that every hospital administrator makes. The donor is worth more than the nurse. The name on the plaque matters more than the person in the scrubs. When I got home, my kids were at school. I sat at the kitchen table and tried to figure out what I was going to do. My checking account had $2,400. My rent was $1,500. My car payment was $320. Utilities, groceries, gas. My daughter needed braces. My son needed new glasses. I did the math over and over again, as if running the numbers one more time would somehow make them different. They weren't different. Without my paycheck, I had about 3 weeks before I couldn't cover the bills. I called my sister that afternoon. She listened to the whole story without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that surprised me. She said, "Elaine, I know you love that job, but maybe this is the universe telling you that place doesn't deserve you." I told her the universe could have found a less expensive way to send that message. The first week of the suspension, I was a wreck. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I kept my phone next to me at all times, waiting for someone from the hospital to call and say it was all a mistake, that they had realized Richard was lying, that I could come back. Nobody called. The second week, I started cleaning, obsessively. I organized every closet in the house. I scrubbed floors on my hands and knees. I alphabetized the spice rack. I think I was trying to control anything, because every other part of my life felt completely out of control. The third week, my daughter Lily came home from school and found me sitting on the couch in the middle of the afternoon doing nothing. She sat down next to me and said, "Mom, are you okay?" And I realized that I had been so focused on what Richard had taken from me that I was forgetting what I still had. I hugged her so tight she told me I was squishing her. The fourth week, I hired a lawyer. The investigation took 6 weeks total. 6 weeks without pay. 6 weeks of watching my savings disappear while the mortgage, the car payment, the utilities, and the grocery bill kept coming. I picked up shifts at a home care agency to make ends meet. 12-hour days visiting elderly patients in their homes. The pay was half of what I made at the hospital, but it kept the lights on. During those 6 weeks, my lawyer obtained security camera footage from the hospital corridor outside Richard's room. The footage showed me entering and exiting the room calmly on every occasion. It showed no signs of roughness, no signs of distress from the patient, and no interaction that lasted long enough for me to have made any of the comments Richard claimed. My lawyer also obtained records showing that Richard had filed complaints against medical staff at 2 other hospitals in the past 4 years. 1 complaint against a nurse in Boston. 1 against a physician's assistant in Philadelphia. Both complaints had been investigated and dismissed. The same pattern, the same type of accusations, dismissive, unprofessional, incompetent, the exact same words, like he was reading from a script. When the review board saw the camera footage and the pattern of complaints, they cleared me of all allegations. Every single one. The chairwoman of the review board, a surgeon named Dr. Linda Park, looked me in the eye and said, "Nurse Elaine, on behalf of this institution, I am sorry for what you went through. You have an exemplary record and this complaint had no merit. We should have handled this differently." I thanked her. But I noticed that Patricia Torres, my supervisor, the woman who had suspended me, was not in the room. She didn't attend the hearing. She didn't call me afterward. She never apologized. Not once. To this day, I have never received an apology from Patricia Torres. They offered me my job back with full back pay for the 6 weeks I had missed. I took the job back. I needed the money, but I want to be honest with you. Something had changed. The hospital I had loved, the place where I had built my career, the place where I had held dying patients' hands at 3 in the morning, that place had thrown me away to protect a donor's feelings. They chose a check over a person, and no amount of back pay was going to make me forget that. I went back to work. I did my job. I was excellent at my job because I had always been excellent at my job, but something inside me was different. Harder, more watchful. I paid attention to things I never used to notice. Hospital politics, who protected whom, where the power really sat. I wasn't the same naive, trusting nurse who believed that doing good work would always be enough. I knew better now. Life moved on. Months passed. I got a small raise. My kids were doing well in school. I started taking extra shifts to rebuild the savings I had lost during the suspension. Slowly, the anger faded. Not completely. It never completely goes away when someone tries to destroy your life. But it moved to a place where I could function, where I could smile at patients and mean it, where I could do my job without thinking about Richard Calloway every single day. And then, on a Tuesday night in February, almost exactly 1 year after I had been suspended, everything came back. I was working the overnight shift in the emergency department. It was around 2 in the morning. A slow night. I was catching up on charting when the radio crackled. Incoming patient. Male, late 50s, chest pains, shortness of breath, possible myocardial infarction. The ambulance was 4 minutes out. I didn't think anything of it. Chest pain cases were routine. I prepared the bay, I checked the equipment, I waited. The paramedics wheeled him in. And the moment I saw his face, my entire body went cold. It was Richard Calloway. He looked different, older. His face was grayish. He had lost weight. But it was unmistakably him. The same jawline, the same silver hair. The same hands that had thrown a pillow on the floor of my hospital room a year ago. Those hands were now gripping the side rails of the gurney so hard his knuckles were white. He was pale. He was sweating. His breathing was rapid and shallow. His eyes were wide with fear. Real fear. Not the manufactured outrage of a man complaining about pillows. Not the entitled impatience of a man making nurses wait while he finished a phone call. This was a man who thought he was dying. And the fear on his face was the most honest expression I had ever seen from him. I froze. For exactly 2 seconds, I froze. My body recognized him before my brain fully processed what was happening. And in those 2 seconds, 1,000 thoughts crashed through my mind. The cardboard box, the suspension, the nights I couldn't sleep, the look on Lily's face when she asked me if I was okay. Patricia Torres saying the word protocol, the pillow on the floor, someone competent. 2 seconds. That's all I allowed myself. Then I moved. The attending physician on duty, Dr. Reyes, was already at the bedside calling out orders. I snapped into action. I started the IV line. I attached the cardiac monitors. I drew blood for the troponin levels. I administered aspirin and nitroglycerin as ordered. My hands moved with the precision of a decade of training. Every movement was automatic. Muscle memory built on thousands of hours of exactly this kind of moment. Richard looked at me while I worked. His eyes followed my hands as I inserted the IV. He winced but didn't complain. He watched me hang the drip. He watched me check the monitor. And I could see it in his eyes. He didn't recognize me. To him, I was just another nurse. Another face in scrubs. Another person he would normally dismiss with a raised finger or a complaint about pillows. But right now, in this moment, I was the person standing between him and death. And he knew it. At one point, while I was adjusting his oxygen mask, he grabbed my wrist. Not hard. Not aggressively. Desperately. Like a drowning man reaching for something solid. He looked at me and whispered, "Please," just that one word. "Please." and I saw in his eyes something I never thought I would see from Richard Calloway: vulnerability, complete, unguarded vulnerability. I put my other hand over his and said, "You're going to be okay. We're taking care of you." I meant it. In that moment, I meant every word. I want to stop here and tell you what I was feeling because I think it's important. I am a nurse. I have taken an oath. I have dedicated my life to helping people regardless of who they are, what they've done, or how they've treated me. And in that moment, standing over Richard Calloway, I felt two things simultaneously. I felt the weight of my professional duty, the thing that had defined my entire adult life. And I felt something else. Something I'm not proud of, but I won't lie about. I felt powerful. For the first time in over a year, I felt like the balance had shifted. The man who had tried to destroy me was now completely dependent on me, and I was choosing to save him. Not because I had to, because I could. Because I was exactly the kind of nurse he had said I wasn't. There is a particular kind of power in being good to someone who was terrible to you. It's not forgiveness exactly. It's something more complicated than that. It's proving to yourself and to them that their cruelty did not change who you are, that they broke nothing, that you are exactly who you have always been, and they are exactly who they have always been, and in that comparison there is no contest. But let me be absolutely clear about what happened next, because what I did was not what you might expect. I did my job, I did it flawlessly. I started his IV. I administered the initial cardiac protocol. I monitored his vitals. I communicated with the attending physician. I was calm, efficient, and thorough. I was, in every measurable sense, the model of a competent nurse. The exact kind of nurse Richard Calloway had once claimed I wasn't. Richard was stabilized within the hour. His condition was serious but not immediately life-threatening. He was going to need surgery, a cardiac catheterization, but he was alive, and I had played a significant role in keeping him that way. Now here's where the story takes the turn you've been waiting for. Once Richard was stable and conscious and coherent, I did something I had never done before in my career. I stood at his bedside and I reintroduced myself. I said, "Mr. Calloway, my name is Elaine. I was your nurse tonight. You might not remember me, but about a year ago, I was also your nurse at another hospital. You filed a complaint against me. You said I was incompetent. You said I was rough with you. You said I made inappropriate comments. None of those things were true. I was suspended without pay for 6 weeks. I nearly lost my home. My children went without things they needed because of what you did. But tonight, when you came in unable to breathe, I was the one who stabilized you. I followed every protocol. I gave you the same standard of care I give every patient, because that's what competent nurses do." Richard stared at me. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The heart monitor beeped steadily in the background. I could see something moving behind his eyes. I don't know if it was shame or recognition or fear or some combination of all three. But for the first time since I had met him, Richard Calloway had nothing to say. I wasn't finished. I told him that I had documented every detail of his care that night, every medication, every vital sign, every procedure, every interaction, all of it logged with timestamps, exactly as it should be. I told him that I had also requested that the charge nurse assign a second nurse to observe and verify all of my interactions with him going forward, to ensure complete transparency and accountability. I told him that if he wished to file another complaint, he was welcome to do so. But this time, there would be a witness to every moment. I said all of this calmly, professionally, without raising my voice, without emotion, just facts, just a competent nurse informing a patient of the care plan. And then I said one more thing. I said, "Mr. Calloway, I want you to know that I genuinely hope you recover fully. I don't wish you harm. I never did. But I also want you to know that the next time you consider destroying someone's career because they didn't bring you the right pillow, I hope you remember tonight. I hope you remember that the woman you called incompetent was the woman who saved your life." I turned around and walked out of that room. My hands were steady. My voice hadn't cracked. My heart was beating fast, but my face showed nothing. I walked to the nurse's station, sat down, and finished my charting. The charge nurse, a man named David who had been watching from the hallway, came over to me. He didn't say anything at first. He just put his hand on my shoulder for a moment. Then he said, "That was the most professional thing I've ever seen." Richard Calloway did not file a complaint. Not that night. Not ever again. He was transferred to the cardiac unit the following morning for his procedure. I didn't see him again during his stay, but I heard things. Through the hospital grapevine, the way you always hear things in hospitals. Nurses talk, orderlies talk, Even the cafeteria staff knows what's happening on every floor. I heard that Richard was unusually quiet during his recovery, that he was polite to the nurses, that he said please and thank you, that he didn't press the call button once for a pillow. One of the cardiac nurses told me that Richard had asked about me. He asked what my name was. He asked how long I had been working there. He asked if I was happy. The nurse thought it was strange. She didn't know our history. She told him my name and said I was one of the best nurses in the hospital. Richard apparently just nodded and didn't say anything else. I thought about that for days. The fact that he asked if I was happy. I don't know what that meant. I don't know if it was guilt or curiosity or some attempt to understand the person he had tried to destroy. Maybe he was trying to figure out how someone he had hurt so badly could turn around and save his life without hesitation. Maybe he was looking for proof that I was bitter, that I was damaged, that his actions had consequences he could see. And instead, the nurse told him I was one of the best in the hospital. I hope that kept him up at night. I really do. 2 weeks after he was discharged, something happened that I didn't expect. The hospital's nursing director, a woman named Dr. Margaret Sullivan, asked me to come to her office. I thought I was in trouble again. That was my first instinct. A year after Richard's false complaint, my body still tensed every time an administrator wanted to see me. I walked in expecting the worst. Dr. Sullivan was smiling. She handed me a letter. It was addressed to the nursing department. It was written on expensive stationery, the kind with a watermark. It didn't mention me by name. But it said, and I'm paraphrasing because I only saw it once, that the writer wanted to acknowledge the exceptional care he received during his recent emergency visit. That the professionalism and compassion of the nursing staff had made a profound and lasting impression. That he had been a patient at many hospitals over the years and had never experienced care of that caliber. And that he was making an additional donation to the hospital's nursing education fund. The donation was $50,000. $50,000 for nursing education, for scholarships, for training, for the next generation of nurses who would be called incompetent by men like Richard Calloway. Doctor. Sullivan told me she didn't know who sent the letter, but she had noticed that the postmark was from Riverside, the same city where Richard lived. She looked at me over her glasses and said, "Do you have any idea who this might be from?" I said no. She said him, and that was that. Deborah, my old charge nurse, found out about the letter. She came to find me during my lunch break. She didn't say anything at first. She just sat down next to me and handed me a copy of the letter. She watched my face while I read it. When I looked up, she had the faintest smile. The kind of smile that says, "We both know exactly what happened here." The kind of smile that says, "You won." I never spoke to Richard Calloway again. I don't know if he changed. I don't know if that night in the emergency room fundamentally altered the way he treats people, or if he went right back to being the same entitled, dismissive man he had always been. I hope he changed. But I'm not naive enough to assume he did. What I do know is this: I didn't take revenge on Richard Calloway. Not in the way most people think of revenge. I didn't sabotage his care. I didn't delay his treatment. I didn't do anything that could be considered even remotely unethical. In fact, I gave him better care than I had to. I was meticulous. I was thorough. I was absolutely beyond reproach. And that was the revenge. That was the entire point. The man who called me incompetent had his life saved by me, and he knew it. I made sure he knew it, not through anger, not through confrontation, through excellence, through being so undeniably good at my job that his own words became the most humiliating thing anyone had ever said about him. People ask me sometimes if I regret not doing more, if I regret not filing a lawsuit against the hospital, if I regret not going to the media, if I regret not making Richard's life miserable the way he made mine. And the answer is no, I don't regret any of it. Because what I did was better. What I did was something Richard can never undo. He can never unlearn the fact that the nurse he tried to destroy was the nurse who kept him alive. That knowledge lives in him now. It will live in him every time he sees a nurse. Every time he's in a hospital. Every time he feels chest pains and wonders if this is the one that kills him. He will think of me, and he will know. Some people set fires for revenge. I performed surgery, metaphorically speaking. My daughter asked me once why I became a nurse. I told her the truth. I said I became a nurse because I believe that everyone deserves to be taken care of, even the people who don't deserve it. Especially the people who don't deserve it, because that's what separates us from them. Lily thought about that for a while. Then she said she wanted to be a nurse too, and for the first time in over a year, I cried. But this time, they were good tears. If this story hit you, I want to hear about it. Drop a comment telling me what you would have done in my situation. Would you have saved him? Would you have transferred him to another nurse? Would you have said what I said? Or would you have stayed silent and let him never know? I'm genuinely curious because I've thought about it 1,000 times and I still don't know if I did the right thing or just the most satisfying thing. Maybe they're the same thing, I don't know. If you're not subscribed yet, hit that button now. I tell stories like this every single week. Real stories about real people who refuse to be victims. The next story is already written and I promise you, it's going to make this one look tame. I'll see you there.